Hello and welcome to Healing Tips from the Heart, Intuition with Helpers, Healers, and Guides. I am your host, Dr. Lori Hops, licensed psychologist, writer, and artist. I've explored mind, body, and spirit related to intuition, or your personal guidance system, since early childhood. Meet my guests who have learned from their personal and professional lives to explore vast realms of knowing, synchronicities, and overcoming challenges. Their stories may inspire you with tools to enhance your daily living and relationships. Hello and welcome my special guest for today, Dr. David Gruder. He is the co-founder, and first president of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, which is where I got to meet him years ago. And he is also a multi-best-selling, 12 award-winning recovering psychologist and professional troublemaker who was also an award winner named America's Integrity Expert by Radio TV Interview Report. David is known internationally for challenging conventionally accepted beliefs that are harming humanity and for equipping leaders to become the change they want to see in many fields, including business, government, the helping professions, education, the media, and more. He helps people to effectively catalyze those changes in their sphere of influence. And I am so honored to have him with us today. So welcome, Dr. David Gruder.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Lori Hops. It's a pleasure to be with you as always, and thanks for inviting me onto your show.
Yes, it's great. Is there anything you'd like people to know about you that I didn't say?
Well, we could spend the entire show about that. I'm happy to share personal experiences about how I came into this sense of purpose and mission. You take the lead and I will happily follow, but no, I think in terms of introduction, that's fine.
Okay. I happen to know that you're a highly creative person. And your creativity shows up probably in every single thing you do. And I'm wondering if maybe that's a good place to start, because the creative spirit runs through all of us in different intensities and awarenesses. And it's a unifying theme.
Yes, I love that. That's a great starting place.
Mm.
So what I'll share about that, at least for starters, is that I grew up on the autistic spectrum.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of people don't know that because I pass as non-autistic. And that's because I compensated out of, or I started trying to compensate out of the autism that I didn't recognize I had when I was in elementary school. I came to the conclusion out of a child's mind, and there was some truth to it, that my parents, who were high functioning autistics themselves, didn't understand how the world worked. And by the time I was in fifth grade, I had made a solemn oath to myself that I needed to figure out how the world worked, not just on my own behalf, but on behalf of my family. And what that has to do with creativity is that my inner world has always been far more vivid and compelling to me than the outer world. And only when I started to step into ownership of my autism spectrum heritage did I finally start to see that my creative superpowers stem from my autism.
Wow. That is so profound. This was not a thing that we were aware of at that time when you were young. When I was young, we're not that far apart in age, but so my goodness, to come across that information, to recognize it within yourself, and then to feel the leadership calling to shift the whole family dynamic, like, wow, that's a triple wow.
Yes, and you're right. Autism wasn't well known
Mm-mm.
in the 50s and 60s when I
Mm-hmm.
was growing up, but my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, was diagnosed at age 4 as a full-blown childhood autistic.
Okay.
So we had that awareness in my family around autism,
Mm-hmm.
but we never thought about me as being on the autistic spectrum because I was a high functioning autistic and because I made that choice, like I mentioned before, to essentially become a compensated autistic. Not that I had any of that wording at that point in my life. I didn't. But in
Yeah.
hindsight, that's what I would call it. I am a compensated, high functioning autistic.
Wow. Well, we could get into 12 different dynamic conversations from this point. So this is incredibly rich. But one of the thoughts I'm having is it really autism and what does that even mean? So that's a diagnostic question. And as related to creativity, I would say maybe not everyone knows that where they are on the autistic spectrum, but people do have access to their creative inner life often.
Yes.
And maybe it doesn't really matter with the label of autistic when it comes to blending the internal life and the external life.
Right. So I agree with everything that you're saying. And my my criteria for mm, high functioning autism,
Mm,
that's personally, I'm not creating a diagnosis here.
yeah.
I'm sharing about me in my understanding of myself
Hmm.
is that as a child, the combination of my much preferring my internal world over the external world, plus my not knowing how to read social cues as a
Mm.
child, was the blend that sent me on this kind of hero's journey as a child to start to understand how the world worked and how people ticked because I was severely bullied as a
Mhm.
kid, in large part because I didn't know how to read social cues. And it was through my devotion to learning how the world worked and how people operated, because that understanding didn't come naturally to me, that's what I recruited. I see in hindsight, that's what I recruited my creative energies to be able to master. And it's really the secret to my superpowers today.
Thank goodness you had the will, probably enough love in your life,
Mhm.
and creative spirit and curiosity to turn the bullying around. Not everyone is so blessed with those kinds of resources. It's easy to get really brought down by bullying in for kids and adults.
Well, I very much was brought down by it in elementary school and junior high. And over the course of my high school years, I gradually emerged bit by bit more and more out of being wearing that target on my forehead saying, if you're looking for someone to bully, I'm your person.
Mm.
By the time I arrived in college as an undergrad, I no longer carried that bullying target on my forehead, and everything shifted for me at that point.
Have you found that that turnaround is something that is teachable?
Yes, it's teachable. It's teachable to the teachable. For me, the starting place was that I was so filled with deep shame
Mm,
as a child and as an early teenager, that I really, in essence, was the opposite of teachable for a number of years, where in fact the storyline that I told myself was that the only form of specialness that I had was that nobody loved me. Well, my parents did, but my peers didn't love me, and I also carried a storyline that my father didn't love me, even though that wasn't so. Um, Simply because the way he loved and the way I needed love were not an ideal match.
mm,
And so as as my self-esteem gradually started to creep upward,
mhm,
I became more and more willing to consider the possibility that maybe I was wrong about about my lot in life being one of being bullied.
okay. So you came with a different expectation?
Gradually, my expectation shifted from I am a rock, I'm an island, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries, to quote the
Yeah,
song from Simon and Garfunkel.
yeah.
Sounds, I am a rock, rather. And it started to shift from that into wanting to experience love, but not yet being equipped to know how to do that. And so the pathway I selected, again, not by conscious design, because I didn't have a frame of reference for really understanding what I'm able to put into words now back then.
Mhm,
But the
mhm.
path that I selected was the overachiever path,
Ah,
that if I overachieved, then I would get love. And
yeah.
what it translated into was that I had to be better than perfect in order to be marginally acceptable.
Oh my God, what pressure.
Mhm.
But I think that it really speaks to how desperate you were to make that connection. It was
Exactly.
vital for your being and worth that kind of effort.
Hmm.
Thank you for sharing this story that many people probably can relate to, that's incredibly painful. It's hard for me to know this about your past because I see you in such a completely different way. And I appreciate your vulnerability and openness in sharing that. And I congratulate your determination to rewrite your story.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's one of an endless number of examples in various people's lives that of the principle that only the wounded healer heals.
Yes,
And that starts with us healing ourselves.
right. So, did you have an inner spark that kept you going during those bleaker times?
I did.
Yeah.
You want me to describe that?
Yeah. I mean, because we started off talking about creativity, and I'm wondering if it's somehow connected, that inner spark that kept you going.
Yes. The the inner spark, there were two inner sparks for me.
Mhm.
The inner spark that saved my life was music.
Oh,
That that was a medium through which I could really channel my creative energies and feel emotionally safe in
hmm,
expressing my heart. It was
hmm,
about the only medium through which I could express my heart and feel safe as a child. I started performing solos both instrumentally and vocally in 5th grade. So my background in music was very, very rich. And in fact, in high school, what I was generally asked was, what conservatory of music are you planning to go to, rather than what university are you planning to go to? So
Mhm.
that was one spark, was the way in which my relationship with music literally saved my life, saved me from being a childhood suicide.
Wow.
And the other spark was that I had a download at around age 11, give or take. It was in that age range. I might be
Mhm.
off by a year. Um, that said, I am meant to have a significant positive impact in the world.
Mhm.
And there was no content to it, so I wasn't told at that point what that was to look like. But the way that download registered in me was life-saving as well. It gave me that spark to keep going in my quest to figure out how the world worked and how people worked, so that I
Yeah.
could have whatever that impact was going to be about.
Hope and a mission.
Yes, hope, a mission, and a creative outlet for expressing my heart in ways that felt safe to me.
Beautiful. And in expressing that heart, you connected with other people.
I connected with other people initially more than I realized I did.
It snuck up on you.
Well, yes, and with disbelief, like when somebody would tell me that such and such a girl had a crush on me, I did not believe it and did not pursue it. It was like, oh, come on, you're kidding me.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. There was often a great gap and divide between our internal understanding of ourselves and how other people perceive us. And we often need a team of translators to get the message through. And then it plays the game of telephone where every translation drops a bit of the original content and gets transformed. And we wonder why we can ever connect with other people.
Oh, it's so true what you're saying. And then layering on top of that, something that's very dear to me in guiding myself is something that you may be familiar with too in psychology, called the Johari window. And the Johari window, Joe and Harry is how that got the name. They were organizational development psychologists back in the day, and they developed this grid to describe 4 different variations having to do with things we know about ourselves and don't know about ourselves, and things others know about us and don't know about us. So
Mhm.
the first is things we know about ourselves that others know about us. The second is things we know about ourselves that others don't know about us,
Mhm.
maybe because we're keeping secrets, but more often because it just hasn't come up, just like what happened in our conversation today. Things I knew about me that you didn't know about me.
Right.
I wasn't keeping a secret. It just never came up.
Sure.
And then the third variation is things others know about us that we don't know about ourselves. And the fourth variation is things that neither we nor others know about us.
Okay.
And the variation that's really, really precious to me is things others know about me that I don't know about myself, because that's part of where my growth edge is.
Okay. And we all have that.
Yeah.
And there's multiple and conflicting opinions and beliefs and observations in that box too.
Oh, yeah, there are.
And sometimes
So,
shift with the same person throughout the day.
and this is where our intuition really comes in a
Okay.
big way, because it's it's got to be up to each of us to chew on the input that we get, so that we can discern whether a piece of input is spot on, whether it's way off target, or whether there's a grain of truth in the input, but the grain of truth has to be reframed in order to become useful.
Right. And sometimes even if you don't have discernment that it's true for you, if it's true for others, then the discernment is, I need to pursue this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, discernment is super important. Do you think that you were able to develop your intuition during those isolation times when you were younger? Maybe it was harder to bridge to get reality checks.
Well, it was hard to get the reality checks, but I came in with a very finely tuned intuition,
Okay. Yep.
to the point where um, when my brother was born, when I was 3 years old,
Mm.
I registered a very powerful reaction that my mother had um, when she was still in the hospital. Because back in the 50s, after the mother gave birth, they kept the mother in the hospital for a period of time, and they actually separated the child from the mother for a period of time, and then they brought the child into the mother's hospital room finally.
Yeah.
Well, when mom was introduced to my brother, she had a very powerful intuitive reaction,
Mm.
which I immediately got. I didn't get the content, but I got what I registered was her horror at what she registered in my brother.
Mm.
And I thought, this is it. I'm out of here. I can't rescue my mother, my brother, and my father. I want to leave. I want to be off the planet. And this was at 3 years old that I
Wow.
felt that. I
Wow.
didn't discover until my early 20s the content that intuition was connected with, when my mother told me that when my brother was brought to her, her reaction was that she was horrified, and she said to the nurse, "This is not my son. This is a thing. This is a monster. Bring my child to me."
Oh my God.
And what she was registering, that she didn't know she was registering, was that he was autistic. He wasn't even in his body yet. He hadn't shown up yet. And she intuitively recognized that without having a frame of reference for understanding it. And so she was mislabeled as having postpartum psychosis.
Oh my God.
She read him like a book, but she
Yeah.
didn't have a context for meaning making, for understanding the meaning
Yeah.
of what she intuitively sensed. I
Mhm.
intuited her terror, and I became terrified, physically at a distance. So she was in the
Yeah.
hospital, and I was staying with relatives while my father was going to the hospital to pick up my mother and my brother, and then pick me up on the way home.
How do you even manage all of that? And there was no conceptualization at the time for any of that.
Exactly. Exactly. So she carried that shame about her reaction to my brother all of my brother's life until I was in my early 20s. And when she told me this, I said to her, "Mom, you have to tell Ben this. You have to tell my brother this." She said, "Oh, I couldn't possibly do that." And I said to her, "I promise you that if you tell him this, it will help him feel more at ease in the world. It will help him understand something that he doesn't even know about, that will create more ease for him in
Yeah.
the world." And she
Because,
found the courage to tell him,
yeah.
and he thanked her. He said, "For the first time, I don't feel crazy."
Wow. Well, it's true because it validates his reality, which is his lived experience without words, all these years with nowhere to put it. She's thinking she's burdening him, but she was actually unburdening him.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Oh my gosh, what a story. What a moment to live through. And how beautiful that there was release and understanding and connection, which often doesn't happen in families.
Yes.
How many times do we inherit these past generational traumas, perceptions? It doesn't necessarily have to be with autism. It could be simply that the child is born and resembles someone who terrified the family in some way.
Yes.
There's so many things that can happen. I did some really deep work myself using the logosynthesis approach with Willem Lammers back in 2019. I
Wonderful.
went to a preconception shock full day, and he actually worked with me on it. And some stuff came in from me that was incredible and has helped me understand so much about my life up until then and moving forward that I'm still working through the layers of. But very few people have this concept at all, let alone know how to work with it.
It's so true. And this whole notion of you're talking about preconception shock from before you were conceived, right?
Yes.
And your own shock rather than your mother's shock.
Yes.
So I have had, I've always, virtually my whole life have had a memory of just before entering the physical, which I'm happy to share, but
Yeah. I mean, you've got the space background. For those of you who are not joining us visually, Dr. Gruder has a beautiful image of space behind him, intergalactic space in blues and purples and pinks and whites. And so it looks as if you're kind of in space already.
and of course, as you would know, that's on purpose.
Yes.
So my before life experience, um, I can only express through metaphor because it was happening at the level of energy, not in the physical universe. But it's as though I'm in front of a door frame,
Mhm.
the energetic equivalent of a door frame, and it's as though the energy equivalent of my hands are white knuckling the sides of the door frame, not wanting to jump through the door, which represents jumping into the physical. And
Yep.
I'm white knuckling as I'm pleading with this semicircle of wise and loving beings behind me, pleading with them, saying, "Don't you know I don't want to go back there again? I don't you know how much I love it here? I'll do anything you say, anything at all. Just don't make me go back there." And their response was, uh, what your soul most needs in order to take its next evolutionary growth step can't be done here. It has to occur in the physical universe, because only there can you actually finally learn that nothing in the physical universe can either harm you or save you. And with that, I was energetically pushed through this metaphorical doorframe into the physical. And I came in on the frequency of I am here as punishment,
Oh my gosh.
which I was in a state of rightness addiction about until I was 35 years old.
Wow. So much for nothing can harm you.
That's right.
Wow. That's heavy.
Preconception shock.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's a fantastic notion. It's hard enough to figure out what we're doing here, let alone the shock we had before we came.
It's true.
But, it gives you a frame. I mean, for me, what came to me, and this could be reality or fantasy, was that I reluctantly agreed to come in this lifetime with the possibility that maybe I wouldn't have to because of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Um,
Oops.
Get me out of here. What I made a big mistake. I don't want to come after all.
So anyway, yeah, there's a lot of really intense energy on this planet, and a lot of incredible inner gifts that are not labeled, identified, recognized, and are so important to creativity and love and survival and connection and hope and mission and all of that. And we get bombarded with a lot of things that aren't that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so important to find other people who speak that language. More and more people are. And I'd like to just go back to the original comment about autism
Yeah.
and that rich inner life, assuming we don't talk about labels and we just talk about soul tendencies creative potential, filters, perceptions, and so on, I do think that there's a different vibrational energy of children coming into the planet now.
I
And
agree.
it's looking more multidimensional than it used to. And so maybe there will come a time when we redefine what, quote, normal is,
Mhm.
what expected is, and what our benchmarks are for connection, for success, for all of this. And I
Yeah,
have a feeling that your enlightened self-sovereignty overlaps with some of that.
it does. The Center for Enlightened Self-Sovereignty is really about helping equip people to step into an elevated future for themselves and humanity. That's along the lines of what you're talking about. Yeah,
And so we have to kind of write new scripts.
without a doubt. And in order to write new scripts, in my experience, we have to first wake up from the spells that we don't know we're under.
Okay. Not so easy.
Well, by definition, because if we think about spells from fairy tales, the first benchmark, the first cornerstone of a spell is not knowing you're under one,
Right.
right? And so to break free from a spell, we first have to become aware that we've been under one. Second, we have to become able to spot when the spell is being cast, when that programming is being reinforced in us, so that we become more inoculated. We become more able to say no to that. And the
Mhm.
third is that we have to have a replacement for the spell that's more compelling to us than the spell could ever be in order to become completely immune to spell casting with that spell.
And creating a better reality.
Exactly. And once we've become freer from societal spells and personal spells, then we can picture an enlightened future for ourselves and humanity, from which we can then further crystallize our sense of purpose, our particular role in helping that enlightened future emerge.
Sounds great. Sign me up.
Okay, membership's free.
So, what are some things that people can do that are maybe practical as a first step or first few steps if they're intrigued by this notion?
Right. Well, I think what what people can do as a starting place is to get a sense of that there is a roadmap, that there is a framework for stepping into an elevated version of ourselves and a more refined, that's not the word I'm looking for, a more crystallized understanding of what our chosen role is in helping to, if we use the Jewish metaphor of tikkun olam, to
Mhm.
helping to repair the world.
Okay. It's so hard to know, people have sometimes an internal sense of dissatisfaction. Maybe they're not being their full authentic self or that something's missing,
Mhm.
but they don't quite know what. And it's hard, in fairy tales, usually the spell is broken by some kind of a human connection. Often it's the archetypal kiss, the kiss of
Yes.
love, but not always.
Yep.
Sometimes it's usually falling in love or a kiss, or I guess, is it a tragedy? I don't know, but that heart connection, the heart connection seems to be the thing that has more power than the spell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if there's some way of bridging that gap through compassion or through selfless offering or being woken up by something really tender.
Yes. The combination of two versions of love, for me, is the magic formula. The speaking archetypally, the masculine consciousness in all of us and the feminine consciousness in all of us,
Mm-hmm.
not having to do with gender, having to do with consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
that that the feminine consciousness version of love is nurturance, and the masculine consciousness version of love is challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And nurturance without challenge leads to indulgence and entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge without nurturance leads to shame.
Mm-hmm.
The marriage between nurturance and challenge is, I believe, the marriage of love energies that offer people the opportunity to start waking up when they're ready to.
Yeah. Beautiful. You and I had a conversation a long time ago about love and how it's the center of your podcast, one of your podcasts. Yeah. And so I see the through lines here, challenge and nurturance, which isn't that like also a Kabbalistic formulation?
Oh, yes, for sure. It's a formulation, as far as I can tell, it's part of the perennial wisdom. It's in Kabbalah, it's in mystical Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Reinhold Niebuhr, a 20th century Christian mystic, um, said that our purpose, the purpose of people who are really trying to help elevate the world, is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Same idea.
Well, I think we have more balance on one side of that equation in our modern day than the other. So
Yes,
maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing to be going around loving people as a day, including ourselves, if we
without a
can.
doubt, without a
Yeah.
doubt.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I'm sure there's 1,000 other things we haven't talked about, but I feel like we're coming full circle from creativity to love.
Yes.
Is there any, maybe they're just flip sides of the same idea, the
Well,
creative
create
impulse of being love.
creativity in service of love creates magic. It creates
Mm,
transcendence. Creativity in the absence of love creates massive harm.
yeah, yeah. So creativity in the service of love. Maybe that's going to be the name of this podcast.
Ooh, love that.
Yeah, beautiful. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we say goodbye for today?
Oh, only 6 dozen things, but no. So yes, there's one thing that I'll add, which is to share my impact mission statement, which is I lovingly co-create a spirit-aligned world of integrity, collaboration, and abundance by vulnerably exposing my heart, wisdom, and flaws.
Wow. That is definitely worthy of writing up and keeping as a mantra.
It
Piece
is
by
written
piece
and
and
written.
together.
Yeah.
There's a lot there to unpack. Thank you for being a way shower for so many. And thank you for releasing your grip on that doorway of consciousness so that you could learn that you can't be harmed and you can't be
Saved
saved.
by anything in the physical universe.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much.
No, this has been a lovely conversation.
I feel very blessed to share you with others
Thank you.
and
Thank
with these ideas that are going to outlive, hopefully, that will outlive everyone involved here right now. May this force continue.
Agreed.
Yes. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you for having me, Lori.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit my website for podcast and resources at hopshealingtips.com. You can also like, share, and subscribe to this channel. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and is not providing healthcare advice. Please seek guidance from your professional healthcare team should you need assistance.